Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us. A practical guide to achieving net zero and decarbonising the NHS, which is a massively important topic. We've got some brilliant speakers today to hear from. This webinar is hosted by the National Health Executive in partnership with E.ON, and we're going to be hearing from Tony Orton from E.ON in a bit. So I'm really delighted to have been asked to facilitate this session today. It's a topic that's fresh in my mind. I've just been doing some work on it recently last week. I'm the net zero lead for the Academic Health Science Network, and for those that don't know, the ASHN help and support the NHS with innovation, and this area is certainly an area that we need to be looking at. So as I said, I'm delighted to be hosting this session. I'm really hoping that people will get out of it what they need, and to do that we need to make sure that we get a good lively chat and debate going, and I'll help do that. As I say, we've got some fantastic speakers, but more importantly, we need to get you to put some questions in the chat so that we can get this to be a session that you value and that brings added value to your work. So please use the chat function. Hopefully it's not too difficult for you to navigate. I'll be keeping an eye out on that chat as we go along, and as I say, we'll throw some questions, some of your questions, to the speakers. On our panel today, we have Janet Smith, Head of Sustainability at the Royal Wolverton NHS Trust. We've got Alison Foster, who's the Programme Director at the Royal Berkshire Hospital. We've got James Bate, who's a Senior Project Manager at South East Greener NHS Programme, NHS England. Christine St John Cox, who's the Platform Lead for the Complex Site Decarbonisation and Head of Energy Partners at the Energy Systems Catapult. And finally, we've got Tony Orton, who's the Business Development Manager at E.ON. So without further ado, let's bring the speakers in, and we'll just hear a little bit about them, get them to introduce themselves, and then we'll start getting into some questions around decarbonising the NHS. So can I hand over to you, please, first, Janet, and just explain a little bit about your role and how you're contributing to decarbonising the NHS.
Hi, it's good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. I'm Janet Smith, Head of Sustainability for Royal Wolverhampton NHS Trust and Walsall Healthcare NHS Trust. So my main, basically my main responsibility is to facilitate and manage and facilitate the implementation of the Trust's green plans and also the climate change impact adaptation, mitigation and adaptation plans. And so far, we have managed from July 2021 to June 2022 to reduce 9% of our carbon footprint across the board. So that's what we've done.
Lovely, Janet, and I'm sure we'll get into hearing a little bit more about that as the session goes on. I'll hand over next to Alison Foster, if I can, please.
I'm Director for the hospital.
Alison, sorry, I think your mic's just playing up. Jack, is that correct? Is that happening for other people? Let me hand over. Sorry, just go one more time, Alison. Yeah, I think you might be playing up. James, I'm going to hand over to you if you don't mind, please.
Pete, can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So James Bate here. I'm the Senior Project Manager for the South East Greener NHS team. So my main responsibilities are working with integrated care systems in the South East on the delivery of their green plan. In addition to this, I focus primarily on estates and facilities, looking at heat decarbonisation and energy efficiency, and also travel and transport. So anything from fleet electrification and active travel. Also really passionate about training and development, how we can engage and educate our workforce, passionate about air pollution and tackling this at a strategic level, and also primary care as well. It's nice to meet you all.
Good, a lot to go on there, James, a big agenda, but thank you for the introduction. I'm going to hand over to Christine next. Christine, I think you're just on mute. Just try.
Am I?
There we go. I can hear you now.
I'm Kristen Cox. I'm from the Energy Systems Catapult. So one of the 9 catapults set up to try and stimulate transition. And our focus particularly is around the energy transition. So we've been looking at all sorts of different things, particularly around sites. And over the last 3 to 4 years, I've been working on a programme with BEIS in the Cabinet Office, looking at the practicalities of decarbonising public sector sites, particularly the NHS, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Defence sites. So through a test bed of 42 sites, we learnt a lot by understanding what decarbonisation looked like, thinking about how difficult it was to actually deploy things, and most importantly, how to get best value for money from the sources in which you delivered things. So we've now got a repository of information that's on the Catapult's website, which is sponsored by BEIS and supports PSTS and low carbon skills funding applications. So we continue to evolve, but try to support this decarbonising through practicalities of knowledge and testing it out.
Lovely. And again, I'm going to try and tease some of that knowledge out quickly, Christine, because I know you can only stay for the first half an hour. And I had the pleasure of hearing from you last week. And I know you've got a wealth of knowledge on your website, in your brain. We'll tease some of that out in the first half an hour. Tony, can I hand over to you, please, next?
Yeah, just welcome. I have been in the energy services and supply business for 30 years now. So I've been predominantly involved in the NHS for about 15 years. And having joined E.ON months ago, beginning to understand now that I know it's quite strange this, that E.ON, as we all know, supply gas and electricity. And my role in life is to reduce that gas and electricity. So to actually reduce the supply to our buildings, in this case, it'll be the NHS. So a lot of experience of all the different technologies that I want to talk about today, and the approach we've taken on a few hospital sites over the years, and more importantly, in the last couple of months as well, working for E.ON. So yeah, quite interested and excited to see how E.ON can assist the NHS in decarbonising their estates.
Tony, can I go back to Alison? Can we hear from you now, Alison? Is the mic working?
Can you hear me now?
It is, yes.
I'm Alison Foster, and I'm the Programme Director for Building Berkshire Together, which is the Royal Berkshire's name for our hospital redevelopment programme. We are on the new hospital programme, and I've also been leading on the development of the Green Plan as part of our strategic case for the new hospital programme. So over the last year and a half, been pulling that together and setting up our net zero carbon programme. So happy to share that journey today with you all.
Lovely, and I'm sure the audience would love to hear from that, Alison. Well, let's make a start then. I've got a few questions. As I said, I would love people to put some questions in the chat, because this session is for you today, and to make it work and to get to hear from the speakers the answers that you need. But I'm going to start off with a quick question around the low carbon and renewable technologies that Tony, you might have seen in your work and potentially in other industries outside of the NHS. So can you just give me 1 or 2 examples just of the renewable technologies that you've seen being deployed successfully?
Yeah, I mean, more recently as well. I mean, I'm involved in quite a lot of different technologies over the years. I suppose more recently now, because everybody is starting to think about not burning gas and also not, hopefully, importing electricity as well. So the 2 main technologies that we are looking at and employing and connecting to hospital sites are certainly heat pumps, and that could be a range of different heat pumps as well, because we're looking at all the different types of heat pumps, which is air source, water source, and also ground source. And I've been personally involved in a few projects where, we've been looking at putting ground source heat pumps into car parks in hospitals. And then more recently, air source heat pumps, large air source heat pumps as well. Again, bringing that experience, not just from the NHS, but also because E.ON itself is very predominantly across Europe, very much of a district heating type company as well. So it's looking at the community now and providing heat to buildings. In this case, it could be a district heating scheme in a city centre, but using that experience and technology, you can bring it into NHS as well. So certainly looking at heat pumps predominantly as a focus last couple of months, and obviously putting a lot of solar panels on the roofs, and also looking at solar carports as well is a big technology for E.ON, which is obviously also connected to because we have got quite a lot of electric vehicle charging points as well that we've installed as well across Europe. So again, those are the sorts of things that, you know, electrification, decarbonisation of heat and those technologies is what E.ON has been looking at. And within the E.ON group as well, because it has its own separate controls business, you know, that's critical for us that on this journey, on this practical guide, you know, we've got to start talking about data and being able to collect that and fully understand what the carbon footprint is of each of these NHS buildings. So because we've got our own controls business, we're very much focused how can we to understand what's there before we even start thinking about replacing any assets on the sites of these hospitals. So looking at heat pumps, looking at solar, and also looking at some really dedicated control systems that can understand then the landscape, and then obviously, you know, start to work out the benchmarking and the targets that hopefully will be linked to the boards of these trusts. So those
Lovely.
are the sorts of things that E.ON are looking at.
Thank you for that, Tony. I think we'll unpick some of that in a minute. I'm going to ask the same question of Christine, because I said we haven't got Christine for too long. But in terms of some of the technologies that you're seeing, because you are working in other settings, so would you just bring to life some of the technologies that are pricking your ears up, please, Christine?
Yes, of course. So I'm just going to start with actually a slightly different angle to this, that it's not just about one technology, but it's about thinking about the site that you're looking at and thinking about how the whole system will fit together, and making sure that the technologies and the combination of the options that you select are going to work together, that they're sized optimally. Traditionally, you know, we look at, you know, whether we're going to adopt something with one line entry and we go, okay, right, what's the business case for that? But actually it's this whole system, and thinking about how you replace things at the end of their life, because that makes it more economically viable. But thinking about how you size it correctly for what you think you might do, that you think about building fabric improvements, which we all know aren't particularly cost effective, but actually if you're thinking about a heat pump, then the elephant in the room might be that you've got to improve your entire heat network. So you'd be better off improving the building fabric and using less energy. So that's just one example of getting it all to fit together and plan it around. So you can talk about innovative technologies, but they need to fit with traditional technologies so that your building is in the right condition. And you know, I don't want to talk about this from a sort of theoretical perspective. You know, that's the realities of what we're going to be looking at. Heat pumps are very expensive to install and expensive to operate. Electricity prices are much higher. So when you take that whole view and you put a model together, you can really see it. What we've also seen in terms of technologies is, and this is the risk of taking it as a line entry, is you know, hospitals overcommitting, committing to a CHP commercial contract that they're locked into for a time period with generated electricity, committing to a wind turbine at the same time, and not being able to actually take and use all of the energy. So the other thing is to think about the commercial model and how you go about adopting the right commercial model for yourself, so that you're not locked in, that you're going to get the right thing for the future, for your future planning and your decarbonisation. And then when you're thinking about the technologies, Tony mentioned heat pumps and renewables. They clearly have a role to play. It's important that you have some renewables on your site, because what that does is that gives you the opportunity to guarantee yourself some low cost energy. That supports putting a heat pump in and makes it as a system more economically beneficial. If you can do it on a bit of land and put a PPA in or a private wire, that will be more economically viable than if you're trying to put it on your roof or a solar carport. If you're locked in an urban environment, that's not going to work. So you need to think about what you can do. But then you've got to think about your energy profiles, and Tony was right about data. You know, storage is hugely important. You know, we've had this week people testing out for the first time, you know, whether the switch off will work, and I think we're going to do it Monday and Tuesday next week. Is that right? No, I might be wrong. Might have been Monday and Tuesday this week. But all of that is really important to think about the whole system again of your site and how you balance things. It gives you some resilience as well, doesn't it?
Lovely. Can I just come in, Christine, if that's okay? Because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But I think, you know, you've made the point around like having a strategy is important, a decarbonisation plan. So can I bring James in, and then I'm going to come to our two speakers from the NHS. But James, in terms of a decarbonisation plan, what are you seeing from a greener NHS team? Because you're obviously seeing the plans coming through. Are you seeing that level of joined up things? Give us a little bit of a flavour about, and also maybe just some of the guidance that's been given to Trust to help develop that strategy.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of heat decarbonisation plans, I think there's varying levels of maturity. In the Southeast, we conducted a baseline exercise prior to phase 3B PSDS to see what trusts had a HDP. Sorry for the acronyms, but that's part of the NHS. Which trust had a heat decarbonisation plan? What was the extent of it? How robust was it? Was it for the whole trust, or was it on a site-by-site basis, or was it just a little bit not as advanced or developed? And yeah, really, really diverse set of results. I think one community trust had sort of 9 heat decarbonisation plans, whereas quite a few didn't have any plans at all. So it just shows that we need to raise the bar, we need to standardise, and we need to try and get everyone in the same place. Without a heat decarbonisation plan, there's no real forward planning in terms of what we need to do to electrify our fleet or decarbonise our heating systems. Heat decarbonisation plans looks at engaging the DNO, looks at what the required capacity is at the moment, and there's essentially a gap analysis to look at what we will need if we are going to completely decarbonise. In terms of guidance and support, there is a lot going on. Now, BEIS have set up regional hubs to support with the development of these heat decarbonisation plans, and the ones in the Southeast and Southwest offer really, really good support. In addition to that, the National Estates team are developing some guidance and templates around HDPs. And again, within the Southeast Greener NHS team, we're looking at sort of providing guiding support around all things estate decarbonisation. For me, HDP is the first step in the journey. You need to know where you are and where you need to be, and then you can start making prioritised decisions on what projects are going to have the biggest impact, rather than the public sector decarbonisation scheme, which is simply fastest finger first. What project can we get over the line now? So I know the Low Carbon Skills Fund does help support the development of those HDPs, but in my instance, what we need to do is every trust needs to have one. And even better, if the ICS can have a heat decarbonisation plan for the entire system, again, you can join the dots to understand what are the capacity requirements at different trusts and different sites.
Lovely, thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to Alison and Janet, actually, just to if you can give the NHS perspective on your decarbonisation plan, and maybe some of the things that James has said around support. Do you feel as trust you've got the support you need to write those decarbonisation plans? How have you gone about your journey? I'll put that to Alison first, if that's okay, and then I'll have the same question to Janet.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Sorry, I think you might have just muted
Hello,
yourself.
can you hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Alison.
Oh, great, okay. Okay, sorry. So yeah, so we are just starting on the decarbonisation, who's actually part of our system meetings in the Southeast. As mentioned, there is some regional support for developing some of that, so we're just starting on that. It was really interesting how actually submitting green plans, which kind of the NHS knew that we had to do for a long time, only really started to happen when we were required to submit green plans, and so that was done last year. So that I don't think we can underestimate the power of requiring people to do some of these things, rather than hoping that we'll all come together and collaborate to get that done. And when we submitted our green plan, actually along our journey, we've been linking with, so we're based in Reading, so we've got Reading University, who have got world leading experts in climate change, who have been working with the council in particular for a number of years. So there's a Reading Climate Change Partnership board working across the system, and their targets are 2030 for net zero for scope 1 and 2, and as organisations, and that has influenced us to achieve or try and do a stretch target of the same. Now, some of that is contingent on us because we're part of the new hospital programme. Some of those plans have to come from the developments we have as being part of the new hospital programme. But it's just also, again, very interesting how the system can influence and drive change if we join up with the system to do that. So I think don't underestimate some of that. And there's some great collaborations happening as well. I've seen in the chat actually somebody talking about how you get pathology teams involved. We're actually on a pilot with to implement the LEAF project, which is a laboratory efficiency assessment framework, and it's to look at in labs, and we're working with the university on that. So we're bringing lab teams together to look at how we can be more sustainable across. We've got labs, they've got labs, and actually, although we might be looking at some different things, which is beneficial, and we can share and collaborate on that, some of the things are very similar. So we've got a project running with in collaboration with the university on laboratories to help with some of that. So yeah, I think we're on the start of that decarbonisation journey. So that's just a quick skip through on that. So thanks Jane for signalling that as well, because I'm hopeful for the regional hubs giving us some support for that.
Thank you. No, well, thanks for being honest with your journey and actually how you're approaching it. Collaboration clearly is important for your strategy. Janet, is it similar for yourself? How have you approached the decarbonisation in your green plans?
Yeah, I think for the trust, I had the privilege of writing our green plans for both trust and also the adaptation plans. And with regards to estates decarbonization and heat decarbonization, one of the targets, that's one of the focus areas, of course, within the green plan. And how we're approaching it in terms of the business as usual. So, which means knowing what the current state of our estate, both for the retained and also marrying it up with the development plans. So ensuring that we know what we wanted to do or where we wanted to get to in terms of retained estates, in terms of the net zero side of things, and also in terms of making it resilient to climate change. Second is the ensuring as well that, on the other hand, any new buildings that we are going to develop or in the development process is actually already looking at the net zero target, so that what will happen is we're not going to be chasing our tails, because if we actually ignore the retained estates, and then we'll end up with only the new ones is net zero, and we'll end up still chasing our tail by basically not doing what we should be doing. So we're looking at business as usual. Second is that I think most of the people know that we have a 30-acre solar farm that's going to supply basically 3/4 of our 79% of our energy requirements 3/4 of the year. And we have so in a sense we are already, although we haven't got a formal heat decarbonization plan yet, but we're already, through the green plan, we already mapped what we wanted to do. So that's one thing, is looking at your for me, is looking at your business as usual, ensuring that your PPM and your maintenance is spot on, and also looking at your backlog liabilities and have actually a good control over it. Because
Lovely.
new technologies, it adds, but how you maintain it and how you implement it is key.
Thank you. No, I'm really sensing that this is still an early journey for many people, and having a strategy, having a plan, getting that guidance, that support, that collaboration is really important. But Christian, I know you haven't got long left on the call. Data is obviously fundamental to putting that plan together, to understand where we are now and the journey we're going on. Can you just share some of your experiences of data, how people might get support with data as well? Where does data play a role, and what advice have you got to offer? Don't say anything.
Question.
Sorry. There you go. Can you hear us, Christine?
Yes. Can you hear
lovely.
me?
I can now. You were on mute, I think, just before that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so being able to put together a strategy requires you to know what you're putting a strategy together on. So having good data is really essential, but you might not have that to start off with. That actually could be part of your overall plan. And I think it's important to make the distinction between a heat decarbonisation plan, which might be for a site, and what you're going to do on a site, and a heat decarbonisation plan or a heat decarbonisation strategy, or whatever you want to call it, that's your overall programme of how you're going to deliver it as an organisation. And working with the NHS, with BEIS, with the Cabinet Office, one of the things that we've been doing is putting together guidance. So we've got 7 key themes which we're hoping to launch, and they will be covering how to put together a strategy, all the way through doing design and feasibility, what type of low carbon skills fund you might need to get, right the way through to the installation, the handover and commissioning, and of course then the operation. And the reason I wanted to go all the way right down is, to the evaluation and the collection of data afterwards to make sure that you are actually saving what you think you're doing. So there's different parts of the data sets that you need to collect, obviously, and each one of those is really important. Owning that data and looking at it yourself is really important. Often it's outsourced. That's outsourcing is great, but you still need to be able to analyze it, to get hold of that data and know and understand what's going on. A starting point, understanding what estate you've got, what size it is, what your basic metering data is enough. But by the time you get to the end of it, you want to know what technologies are delivering for you and what that looks like. So it needs to evolve over time. And I think that that's quite an important thing to capture. Often it's difficult to get a business case in and get it signed off, because people go, well, what does it give me? What's the business case? Where's the saving? Where's the benefit? And the simple benefit is knowledge. And we need to work better about how we get that signed off. So we have some thoughts about how much it saves you and what the benefits are.
Lovely, thank you for that. And I might just move on to kind of business case development, and funding is obviously fundamental to that. Now, there are pots of money that have floated around the NHS, the public decarbonisation scheme. There are other pots of funding, but are there funding models, Tony, that you've seen that might benefit the NHS? How can people look to fund some of this decarbonisation from work that you've seen?
Question about we know what the answers are. We know all the technologies are out there, it's in the press, etc. We know what people are doing, but where does the cash come from? And there's a couple of things that we have looked at and obviously would assist the trust with is what we call a fully funded solution, because E.ON itself, as a major contributor to net zero, does have funds available. And that could be and it's sort of linking into a few things that a lot of the panelists have said, in terms of long-term maintenance. So the assets that we would deploy on either on the site or even off the site as well, because we do look at on-site renewables and also off-site renewables. And as Christine said, these people, we can have a funded solution where E.ON can fund all the costs associated with low carbon technologies, including, as Christine said, a whole system approach where at the moment we are looking at a lot of fabric measures. So, doing all the fabric improvements, the controls and the low carbon technology can all be wrapped up into, and I'll call it a net zero service, which is something that E.ON is developing, where we would supply all the necessary power, heat and cooling to a hospital, to a building, to an estate, wrapped up into a pence per kilowatt hour, and also a fixed charge, which could be fixed and variable over 20, 25, 30 years, because obviously this is a net zero journey. And I know Alison has said that some of the targets now are 2030, but we would be more interested in a long-term partnership, because as Christine said, when you start looking at improvements of fabric, it's a long-term payback. So we would look at funding solutions that we would fund it. We could also, if we don't get a grant, because obviously a lot of the work at the moment that I'm involved in and a lot of the improvements the NHS is making is via the PSDS decarbonisation grant. But if that becomes dry, let's say, and is not available, there is other ways of, seeking and sourcing investment from sort of green investment banks as well. So E.ON would come up with, like I say, a funded service solution that includes the production and delivery of a decarbonisation plan. So we'd help the trust to do that. So we'd produce it and then wrap it up into the costs long term. And then obviously it would, one, reduce the initial cost to the trusts. They wouldn't be laying out any capital, and then they get the improvements that they need. But then through service level agreements and KPIs, as Janet said, in terms of making sure that all the maintenance and efficiency is all wrapped up in that contract with us, if we were the partner, to deliver the net zero. So it can be a fully funded solution from E.ON.
Lovely. No, well, thank you for that. And the event that I organised myself last week, I opened up just giving my personal example. I've got solar panels on my roof, but I didn't fund them myself. They were funded by the company. I accepted that I don't get any money for the electricity that's generated. I just use for free what or consume for free what's being generated at the time. Everything else goes into the grid. But that was a funding model that suited me. I think that was back in 2015. James, can I just keep touching on funding there? Is anyone looking at funding options strategically? And then I'm going to go to the chat, because I can see we've got a couple of questions about how we might get some support for wider NHS, like primary community. But just to stay with funding for a second, James, is anyone strategically looking at what the funding options could be?
I mean, whenever I talk about estate decarbonisation, capital is always the biggest challenge. Like Tony rightfully said, we know what the solutions are, the innovations out there, but who's going to pay for it, right? These are expensive. There are some sort of national funding streams available. We mentioned sort of public sector decarbonisation scheme previously. But again, at a strategic and national level, I don't think this is being prioritised. If we think of the NHS estate, it's already under a massive amount of pressure, backlog maintenance, the worry of blackouts, tech going down in the summer. These are critical issues which can be resolved by deploying energy efficient solutions and decarbonisation measures. But again, net zero and the green agenda, in my opinion, isn't sort of considered a number one priority, and it never will. And this is why we need to embed sustainability into what is already considered a priority. So strategically, what we're doing in the Southeast is trying to work more closely with the trusts and ICSs to understand prioritization. So gathering data, developing some strategic documents to understand, well, what projects do we need to focus on first? And then it's a matter of looking at the business cases. It's looking at the weighting. I know within procurement at the moment, you've obviously got your 10% social value and sustainability weighting in all sort of contracts. However, what about business cases? How can we include sustainability within sort of delivering clinical outcomes and cost efficiency? For me, capital, with it being the biggest problem, it also presents some opportunities. So within energy at the moment, it's the best time to ever invest in renewables, given the price of energy at the moment. Best time to look at on-site generation. Janet mentioned her solar. And let's look at deploying these technologies together. Just this morning, I learned about a process called sort of co-location, whereby you can have a solar, and that solar is then stored in batteries, and that batteries can then sort of supply EV chargers on site. It's a closed circuit. It's what we should be looking for. So yes, capital will be a problem, but until it's considered a priority, we have to look at other measures to try and finance these measures.
Thank you for that. I'm going to look at the chat. There was a question around, there's obviously a big focus on hospitals. Obviously, hospitals are a big consumer of energy, but the primary and community estate. And Alison, I just wondered, you talked a lot about collaboration. As part of your plans, have you been collaborating with community and primary care? And then similar sort of question to James after that, Alison, around what support might be for our other NHS partners and our supply chain. But Alison, have you collaborated with primary community care?
Yeah, so we're doing a bit more of more of that actually recently, because in Reading in particular, we've got a lot of development. And so there are section 106, 108 resources that generally go to primary care, but actually we're looking at how we can collaborate more on using that funding. So we've got some discussions on that. We have discussions with our mental health trust around sharing estate in particular, and sharing plans for what we're doing around decarbonisation and net zero. And some of those are through the ICS. So we've got an ICS group that meets really regularly, and from that there are discussions about how we can collaborate more closely at a local level. And I've just put in the chat around, we've had a discussion just before Christmas with the local council, who have got plans around expanding their ground source heat pumps, and and where those plans end and over what time frame. And we had that discussion ourselves and the university around, what if you were to extend it further? It would then accommodate some of our needs. What would that take? How could we shape that, and how could we influence that longer term 5 to 10 year strategic planning at a local town plan level? So we are involved in and having those discussions as well, which are happening because we have forums where we meet. They're not, we wouldn't have thought of those ideas. Well, we might have thought of them ourselves, but actually there are forums that people meet regularly as a system. And then we have conversations that lead to, oh, wouldn't it be interesting if we shared district heat pumps? What could we benefit? What could be the benefit of that? And is it possible? And is there an opportunity? So yes, we are starting to actually move from ideas to actually starting to look at some focus projects on local collaboration with other public estate in particular.
Lovely. That's a really insightful answer, and I'm glad you said what you said. I was thinking myself this morning why that absolutely makes sense to bring these plans together. So Janet, in your area, do you have the networks to allow that? Is that already happening now, or do you have the networks to allow you to have those conversations with other key partners? And that might be wider than the public sector. That might be the private sector as well, and their energy needs.
Yes, definitely. The trust actually sits on the sustainability network for Black Country. So it's managed within the ICS. And I happen to be one of the coordinators as well for the Midlands Net Zero Delivery Hub. And so we coordinate and actually partner with different organizations. And Black Country recently did a combined application for PSD3. So as an ICS, which means it was a collaborative bid, which actually, as far as I was informed, was funded. The bid was funded. So that's one way to cooperate, because I think the learning there is that RWT has always been quite successful in terms of bidding for funds on PSDS, particularly SAILIX funding, but the others within the ICS are not. So the decision within the estates group is actually to do a group bid, so that then the benefit of it then benefits everyone within the ICS. So that's one way of making things happen. And the other thing as well is that we have specific projects like inhaler recovery project, which is a scheme in cooperation with the local pharmacy community pharmacies, with Plastic Europe, with GSK, the local council. So there is that collaborative work, and we're looking at existing systems already to utilize to make it happen. So, and I think what's important, and I always emphasize this in any forum, is that it is quite important to look at what you already have, improve on it, and also look at what are the opportunities, networking, partnership opportunities, both at the local level, because even our solar farm, it is actually built in a contaminated land, which the local council allowed us to use. So there is that thing, is that explore your network explore the available opportunities, whether on your own or in partnership with the others. And third is don't be shy in sharing both your successes and challenges, because it's a way to learn from each other, and it is quite crucial. And also it's quite crucial in terms of funding, because James and the others had actually mentioned about funding. Funding is always an issue, but like what I said, you need to shop around for the best opportunities and for the best deal around, in a sense. E.ON is offering a good one, but there will be others as well. And what makes sense for you as a trust or an organization is what will work. So that's the basic of it. And in terms of actually, I just wanted to add this. In terms of the business case process within the trust, sustainability is actually part of the business case process. The sustainability impact assessment is part of it. The sustainability initiatives tracker is part of it. So it is embedded within the processes, because the only way sustainability can actually become successful if it becomes part of the business as usual. It's not a separate agenda from any other, agenda or targets within the trust. And that's quite key. And you need to get your board behind you and your execs.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Janet. James, I could see both you and Tony nodding as well as Janet was giving her answer. Do you want to build on some of that, James, as well?
Yeah, I think it was, firstly, Janet, you've got to get senior leadership to buy into this. Absolutely critical. I think it was more from what Ali was saying around working with the ICS, especially in reference to the question of primary and community care. The ICS can really sort of bridge the gap between primary and secondary care and drive efficiencies in this area. What the ICS can also do in terms of an opportunity is work with the local authority. The local authority have the same plans, have the same strategies, and are sometimes more advanced, especially in terms of EV charging. So why not work in collaboration and come together on this and have sort of coordinated discussions with DNOs to look at what needs to happen. In addition, Ali has mentioned about working with the university. Now, some of our biggest hospitals in England are right next to universities, who also have a similar estate to our hospitals. So again, why are we not working in partnership here, and why are we not having collaborative and coordinated discussions, especially around really complex issues such as estate decarbonisation? I think NHS Property Services are an interesting stakeholder that's worth a mention. Obviously, own a number of our primary care and community sites, and have got some interesting plans around green plans and estate decarbonisation. So there's a number of regional leads now in post, so it's worthwhile sort of doing a bit of digging if you're keen on that. And then primary care, lastly. Primary care is very complex. The ownership models are very difficult. Obviously, if you're the landlord, then by all means, you can install solar and install EV charging points, but it's not as easy as that. So primary care is really, really tricky. I've noticed on the attendee list, there are a number of sort of primary care individuals. So if you do require support, I think it's worthwhile trying to reach out so we can sort of provide that guidance where necessary.
Lovely, thanks. We're in our last sort of 15 minutes of this webinar, so I'd like to start talking about some of the barriers and challenges still, because I think we're hearing from a lot of them. So, Tony, let's think about sort of frustrations from Ian's perspective. What frustrates you the most about helping out the NHS, helping out the public sector? Where do you think some more intelligence from the NHS would help you in your role? Sorry, just on mute again. I don't know if you have to.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Pete. Yeah, no, a good question again. I was just about to sort of again pick up on what Sarah was asking a question there. The frustration is, and cost is obviously a frustration. Is where does the cash come from? But I think the other frustration as well is the procurement process. And I think one of the questions that Sarah was asking was, are we on all the public procurement frameworks, which we are on most of them, that Crown Commercial Services, the NHS Shared Business Services framework as well. So that procurement process frustrates me immensely, because it can take quite a lot of time as well, and filling paperwork in, etc. But I was just thinking out loud, the process and hopefully the assistance that we can give, as Janet said, there's not just E.ON, there's quite a few other companies out there that do this, but delivering what I call very quickly a high level assessment of what is required for each of these, like James has said, primary care, mental health, social care, and also the NHS Trust as well, helping them to do, first of all, and that's what we would do and can do, a high level assessment on a mini business case. Then you do a more in-depth business case. So you get to a stage where you're sort of working in parallel with the decarbonisation plan and the green plan before you come out to market, because I fully understand with NHS, you've got to go through public procurement. So it's assisting that journey to bring you out to market with the right solution. And then obviously we'd be in, like everybody else now, be involved in projects, for many years where we bid against, the competition, etc. So we want to, as a partner, as quick as possible. So the frustration is, Pete, that it's getting, in there to do the survey, and I know we fully appreciate, as James has said a few times, is that, the constraints that the NHS is under at the moment and the resources, we're trying to help them as much as we can, that they can carry on with their permit, especially day jobs. We'll do all that, donkey work, etc., and get the data, come up with the ideas, the solutions, the costs, how much it would save you, how much your carbon footprint would look like in the future. Do all that as an assistance that hopefully, fingers crossed, we end up becoming your long-term partner, but fully understanding that you go down a particular framework route. And again, I can share with the audience all the frameworks that we're on, what frameworks are out there, because obviously the main differences between the frameworks is the amount of support they get from that particular framework and the fees per the inspection they charge. So that's the main differences. So for me, the frustrations would be getting things going on site, being able to access the areas that we need to access, get the data that we need to come up with a mini business case, and then flow hopefully through, as Sarah said, a public framework, and fingers crossed they pick the right partner then to go forward with. So there's the frustrations that I come across.
Thank you. And again, I'm just reading through the chat as you're saying that. I want to try and I'm trying to weave people's questions in there, but there's there's a question from Stephen around, he works for a GP partnership with 55 sites. That shows you the scale of some of these primary care networks and the opportunities. And similarly, there was a question around the Salix funding and the process. Not always easy. From my perspective, one of the grants that I've just seen, but it wasn't for the NHS, but it was certainly for the supply chain, was a £70 million decarbonisation grant from the government. Now, how do we make people aware of that? How do we connect some of these funding pots? I think is a question for us to ponder on and to go away and just to try and help people, because as you said, there's a lot of support there. There's potentially different pots of money. We've got to be able to bring it together for people to see and help them navigate that, and then hopefully help them secure some of that funding. Janet, let me come back to you and Alison again, just to hear maybe a couple of your frustrations, one or two frustrations from your perspective. Where do you think you need most support as a trust, or where would you like to see some extra support as a trust, Janet? Again, you're just on mute. Sorry, Janet.
Sorry.
There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. I think there is a need for more coherence, really, in terms of what's required to deliver net zero. Because at the moment, we do have the net zero estates delivery plan, which is been released and the technical annex, but a lot of people are still waiting for the net zero building standards. It keeps on getting mentioned, but it's never yet published, and that kind of relates to capital carbon is one of the big ticket carbon footprint in the trust. And unless we really know exactly what we're meant by net zero building, we kind of, it's like shooting a bullet in the dark and hoping to hit something. So that's one thing, a more coherent way of, defining exactly what we want, particularly with estates, because energy, once we actually have our solar farm, what we'll be targeting is reduction in the use of energy rather than carbon, because as we know, the solar farm being renewable doesn't carry any carbon footprint. So that's one challenge. The second challenge actually is getting the support of the staff themselves in your journey in your journey to sustainability, because it's crucial, because the support of the staff will ensure that whatever you're doing is sustained through business as usual. That's one challenge. The other one is like in terms of funding, things are it's you provide the funding and there is always a really short time frame. You're asked to deliver it within 12 months or 18 months, but then what they are expecting is you've already worked out right before you even bid all the nitty gritty of your scheme, which means the trust then has to actually commit monies to develop that, and then right at the end there is no confidence that whatever you work out is going to be funded. So that's the area. So the upfront work is not usually not funded, and then when you actually successful, you're only given a finite, really really short time frame to implement it. And as we know, design development itself takes a lot of time. So realistic time frames, really, and realistic expectations from the funding agency.
Thank you for that. Alison, do you recognise any of those frustrations, or have you got other?
Yeah, absolutely. Although there's we're probably slightly different in that because we're on the new hospital program, which is a great opportunity in terms of being able to invest. But because we are on the new hospital program, we are kind of at the behest of waiting until we hear from the national program what our funding envelope is and what kind of scheme we can invest in, which means that actually some of the progress that we could be making is delayed. It's slowed down because we're waiting for some of these decisions. So, for example, we've got two options. One is to stay where we are, and one is to move to a different site. That has huge implications for us in terms of what we invest in here and now, and for the future. And so, because we're on that national program, great, it will give us some investment, but it has those challenges as well. That's that we're having to manage as part of managing the risks that are linked to the estate, which most people will is in NHS estates will recognise in terms of backlog maintenance and the environment not being fit for purpose for a lot of this. So the investment generally in when we're lucky on the new hospital program, there are dozens of other hospitals who should also be on a new hospital program with some of the conditions of their estate, which is going to restrict the improvements that they can make going forward. So investment in estate.
Thank you for that. I'm going to try and again just pick off a couple of questions and try and answer a couple myself. There was one around, is there a site where we can find this funding information? I'm not sure I've stumbled across one site. I think there are numerous sites, and again, I'm hoping we can share our contact details after this webinar. So please reach out to me and James. I'm sure me and James can just have a discussion about where the funding might be. We see some of that nationally from the NHS estates team, but as we said, this covers a lot of different areas. There's a question around carbon calculators again from Garana, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Again, I can help you with that life cycle analysis of syringes. So people have been asking a lot about the procurement and supply chain, but obviously today we've focused a lot around the sort of buildings, the infrastructure, the energy that goes with that. But people, if they've got questions around other areas of decarbonisation, I'm sure James and I would love to help you with that, some of that thinking as well. We're going to have to start thinking about wrapping up in 5 minutes. So I just want to start getting our speakers to think about what one key message would you leave our audience. If you could offer a pearl of wisdom, something that you really want people to take away today, what would that be? I'm going to go to you first, James, if that's okay on that question.
Big question. There's 100 things I'd like you to do, but I think the first one is the only one actually would be to connect with system partners. So the new operating model of the NHS and the formation of integrated care systems last year provided a massive opportunity to stop working in isolation, to make the connections with public sector organisations who are all trying to achieve the same thing, because that's the only way that we're going to drive efficiency. I know that the NHS and delivering sustainability has felt like a lonely place for a long time. However, we are all on this journey together. Likewise, so are local authorities, and likewise, so are universities. So again, work with the Integrated Care Board, make those connections to universities and local authorities, understand what their plans are and whether they align with yourself, because 3 brains are better than 1, and we can achieve this by working together.
Lovely. Tony, sorry, James, you said you were going to struggle to give an answer, and you give a brilliant answer. So well done. I think that's a very good top tip. Tony, can I hand over to you next? Just on mute. There we go. Thank you.
No, I can hear me now. Sort of touching on what James said there. I think the message is, I think our strong message is collaboration. I think, and it's also to take away that, you're not the first to do this. This has been done before. These things that we're talking about have been done before. Fabric improvements and low carbon technology, and heat pumps and solar, it's all been done before. It's bringing it all together. But the strong message I'd like to say is, Paddy especially, will give us a chance, because there is a lot of support. Pick up the phone or drop us an email. But in terms of, to assist you, we fully understand. I'm sure competitors do, but we fully understand the NHS has got massive constraints, massive challenges. We've got the answers, as James said. We've got the technologies, we've got the process, we can find the money. It's a case of really, being brave and ambitious and get going. That's the message I'd like to the audience. Get going. We're here to help.
Again, another cracking message, and I'm sure music to many people's ears. So thank you for that, Tony. Janet, I'll hand over to you next with the same question. What one key message would you like to leave the audience?
One key message that I would like to leave basically is know your carbon footprint. Know which part of your trust operations are carbon intensive, and then prioritize your actions and initiatives based on that. But then not forgetting to actually look at your current resources internally and what are available external resources as well that you can actually harness. And like what James said, get the expertise of other people, bring them in, because that's one way to go about it. And don't forget to share your successes and your challenges, because learning from each other is key.
Lovely. No, again, thank you for that message. Alison.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
great. I'd agree with all of that. I think just to add to some of the collaboration, the only way I think that we're going to get investment into some of this is to collaborate with system partners, but also the private sector. And I would also add, as NHS, you have the opportunity to offer your environment as a test bed for pilots, for research, and for the innovation, and lots of different departments as well. So not just clinical, but a range of things. So I think that's really, we've got that kind of good card in our back pocket to be able to link with other people. I know I've added onto those, but I would also say about embedding things into business as usual and building up your particularly your staff group, who are your local community, into your normal business processes. Every time they think about making a change, what is the impact on sustainability, and to build those checkpoints all the way through. We've got about 95 carbon champions in the trust at the moment, and they're amazing, and they're helping in every department in the trust to think about those things.
Lovely. Thank you for that. I mean, I would reiterate everything our speakers have said. I just want to thank our speakers today. I think coming into the last 30 seconds of the session. I often say at the end of webinars that I run, don't struggle alone, just ask. I'm sure any one of us would not mind if you just reached out and asked, who do I need to connect with? How can I find this information out? How are they doing that? And as Janet said, please share your learning. It's so fundamental to inspire others. So thank you for joining us today. It's very difficult to give everything that we want to be able to give people in 1 hour, but hopefully it's the start of many continued conversations. So thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.